Okay, in this lecture we're going to talk about the midpoint formula and how to graph some equations. The midpoint formula is how it sounds. We might have a line segment between two different points. So let's suppose I have the point -7, -5. Okay, so let's call this point P. And we have another point, say Q, which is -2, -2, 7. Now, if I join these two up, I'd like to know where the midpoint is. In other words, where's the point that divides this line segment completely in half? Alright, so the way to do it is to think about, alright, let's look in the horizontal direction and the vertical direction. Right, so to do that we'd like to know what's halfway in the vertical direction, what's halfway in the horizontal direction. Now the midpoint then is really just the average, alright, of these two. So it's x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Right, so in this case here, the midpoint between P and Q is simply going to be equal to, and I'll leave it in coordinate form, is going to be simply -2 plus -7 divided by 2, and -5, or actually let's keep it the same, it's going to be, let's go 7, okay, make this the first one, 7 plus -5 over 2. So this will be in fact -9 over 2 by, this will be 2 now over 2 over 2. So this will be equal to -9 on 2, 1. Alright, would be the midpoint. Okay. Right, now another thing we could do is, well, let's suppose that we have the midpoint given. Okay, so let's suppose I have a point here, let's suppose we have 6, 5. Okay, let's call that A. And we have the midpoint here of, let's suppose here a B, which of course is -1, 2. And this is our midpoint, let's call it M. So if I was to go down here, somewhere across here, I might want to find this point over here, let's call this C. So let's find C when the midpoint is in fact -1, 2. Right, so what I'd have is -1, 2, and if I take this point over here, let's call it xy, then the midpoint would be found by x plus this value here, 6, divided by 2, and y plus 5 divided by 2. So really I've got two equations here. I've got x plus 6 over 2 has got to be equal to -1, which implies of course that x plus 6 is equal to -2, or x is equal to -8. Okay, just solving a linear equation. Also we'd have x plus 5 on 2 is equal to 2, so y would be equal to, y plus 5 I should say, is equal to 4. and multiplying both sides by 2, and that means y is equal to -1. And so my point over here would in fact be -1, x would be -8, sorry, and the y value is -1. Okay, that would be the other end point of that line segment that has -1, 2 as the midpoint. Right, the next thing we want to be able to do is in fact draw some graphs of some simple equations. Some could be linear, so let's look at example 1. Let's graph y equals -2x plus 5. Now, the most straightforward or simple way to do this, it's not the easiest way, we're going to show you some easier ways, but that is just to set up a table of values here. Now, usually what I do is I choose some values that are negative, so I could have, say, -2, -1, 0, 1 and 2. Notice I have a range of 2 negatives, 2 positive x values and a 0. Now when I put -2 in here, what happens? If I put -2 in here, then I have -2 times -2, which would be 4, plus 5 would be 9. Now this produces an ordered pair xy, which would be -2, 9. Okay. If I put -1 in here, then I'm going to have -2 by -1 is +2 plus 5 is 7. So this gives me -1, 7. And I can plot these as I go. -2, 9, which would be here. -2, 9, which is here. I would have -1, 7, which is here. Now when I put 0 in here, I get -2 by 0, which is 0, so I'd get 5. So I'd get 0, 5. Right, if I put a 1 in here, I'd get -2 by 1 is -2, plus 5 is 3. So I'd get a 1, 3. And when I put a 2 in here, -2 by 2 is -4, plus 1 is -4, plus 5 is 1. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'd end up with a 2, 1 here. Now, notice that this is a straight line, so we draw a line through these points. All right, put an arrow on it because it does continue on. And that would be my y equals -2x plus 5. Okay. All right. Next, let's suppose that I want to do. So let's do number 1. Number 2. Let's suppose I want to graph the cube root x equals. Let's do it here. X equals the cube root of y plus 1. Right, so this sort of spun around here, hasn't it? So again, we'd want to do some values. All right, and we'd have x here, y here, and here we have our xy values. All right, so again, we might want to choose some values. Now, we want to be very careful here because we're going to be finding the cube root. So to get the x value, we're going to use y values to get the x value. So it's sort of reverse here to the dependent and independent variable. But that's okay, but we want to be careful how we actually choose our values. We want to find values inside this cube root that we can actually find exact values of. So I'd like cubed values in here. So, for example, if I had y was -2, I'd have -2 plus 1 would be -1. What's the cube root of -1? Well, what number multiplied by itself 3 times gives me -1? Well, it would be -1. So that would be -1 to -2. So that would be -1, -2, which would be this guy here. Okay. Right, now what else could I find a cube root of? Well, what if I had a -9? Oh, -9 here, sorry. So -9 would make a -8 in here, and the cube root of -8 would be -2. -2 by -2 by -2 would be -8. So that would be this value here. So it would be -2, -9, which is this guy here. Okay. All right, next, what if I had y was equal to 0? Then I'd have the cube root of 1, and that would be 1. So that would be right here. So let's put that in. So when this is 0, all right, cube root of 1 would be 1, so I'm left with 1, 0, which is right there. All right, now what if I put in a 7? Well, when this was 7, then I'd have 7 plus 1 is 8. The cube root of 8 would be 2, so I'd end up with 2, 7. Notice you have to be smart about what numbers you pick, and that would be 2, 7 right there. Right, I'm going to run out of room here, but basically what we have, if I can draw this correctly, I would go up here like this, and then around like this, and it keeps going. So that's sort of rough, all right, what it does, and it keeps going. All right, so this one is in fact x equals the cube root of y plus 1. Okay, so let's look at a third one. Now the third one here, all right, let's suppose we want to find y equals, what, a graph, y equals -x squared plus 1. So again, we would want to find some values. So here's x, y, and xy. Right, so again, we might want to find some negative values, positive value, like so. Right, so let's have a look. When I put -2 in here, be very careful about this. Let me do it down here so you see. When x is equal to -2, what we have is y is equal to the negative of -2 squared. Be absolutely clear on that. Plus 1, which would be the negative of 4, plus 1, which would be -3. So that would be -2, -3 is my point. So -2, -3 is right here. Okay. If I put -1 in here, I square the -1 to get 1. So it's -1 plus 1 would be 0. Like so. All right, next if I put 0 in here, I'd end up with 0 squared is 0, negative of 0 is still 0, plus 1, so I get 1. So I get 0, 1. Right there. Right, when I put 1 in here, I'm going to get 1 squared, which is 1, -1, plus 1 would be 0. So I get 1, 0 now. Right there. And if I put 2, then I end up with 2 squared, which is 4, -4 plus 1 is 3, so I end up with -3 here. So 2, -3 again. Now if you want to try 3, for example, let's see what happens here. 3 squared would be 9, -9 plus 1 would be -8. So 3, -8, which is here. Right, and if you checked -3, you'd get the same thing. And so here is y equals -x² plus 1. Right, and so there's some basic graphing that you can do by just plotting some points.